Thanks for tuning in and welcome back to the shop. This is our 2013 Mitsubishi Fuso FG and it is refusing to start. If you've watched the last couple of episodes of me diagnosing this, you'll know there are a number of things that I've tried. If you're trying to diagnose a similar no-start problem, I highly recommend you watch the previous 2 videos because you may find something in there that resolves it for you. Now, I have also received a lot of really good suggestions in the comments that I've gone through and tried. But today, I'll be swapping out 3 of the sensors in the exhaust system that measured as faulty to see if we can clear the codes and get the truck to start. Now, if that doesn't work, I do have a couple more things I can try, but fingers crossed, this is it. One of the things that I did confirm in the second diagnostic video was that there were in fact sensors in the exhaust that were out of range. Now, while a sensor being out of range shouldn't prevent the engine from starting, it is possible that since there were so many out of range, the truck basically just said, yeah, no, not happening. And since I was able to confirm that the sensors were faulty, it's an easy thing to replace. They need replacing anyway, so I'm just going to do it. Replacing the temperature sensor probes is pretty straightforward. All you're going to need is a 17mm wrench. You might be able to get away with 5/8 if you don't have metric. Undo the nut, take the sensor out, replace the sensor, and swap it on the plug. One little trick you might find useful, when I'm trying to loosen something like this that's extremely tight, sometimes I find that actually pulling it tighter and then looser makes it loosen up.
When loosening these sensors, use a back and forth motion so you don't gall the stainless steel threads. Once the nut is loose, just lift the sensor straight out.
EGT sensor number 2 is not too hard to get at with your wrench, but SCR sensor number 1 has so many brackets around it that it's virtually impossible to get the wrench on the right angle from the front. If you try and pull it from here, you'll likely strip the nut. So let me show you a little trick. Instead of trying to get your wrench in and get it from the front, you can actually come in from the back behind all the brackets and get the perfect angle. And then it comes free. If you're following this video to see how to change out your exhaust gas temperature and your SCR temperature sensors, the next thing you're going to run into that is beyond frustrating is the design of the exhaust bracket that holds the SCR in place, because with the design of this bracket, you can't actually remove the SCR sensor. What you'll need to do in order to be able to remove this is come to the outside and lower this bolt here, and the second one that is just in the back there, and this will allow the SCR to drop down just enough to get that sensor out. But really, they could have designed that bracket with that much more room.
You don't need to fully remove these bolts, just loosen them far enough so that they're fully flush with the bottom of the nut. This will allow the SCR to drop just far enough. Once you get that sensor out, I'm going to make a suggestion, and this is going to help you or whoever it is who has to change that sensor out next, which if you don't do this, it's going to end up being you. With the sensor removed, tape over the hole on the SCR and die grind out the bracket above it to make it easier to get the sensor in and out.
And when you're trying to get this sensor in or out,
make sure you slide the nut all the way up and around the corner before you try and get it past the bracket, or the entire assembly as one will not clear this nut.
With the SCR and EGT sensors reinstalled, it's just a matter of running the wiring back along the same route and plugging them in. With the 2 temperature sensors swapped out, the next thing I'm going to change is the differential pressure sensor for the DPF. To change this out, all you need is a 10mm and a pair of pliers. Looking in from the outside, this is the back of the SCR. You need to kind of look past the sensors on the back of the SCR. I'm going to zoom way in here. You need to look through this mounting plate frame, and on the other side, right down here, there's one 10mm nut that's holding it on. Now, if you want to locate this from the underside, you can fairly easily, but you can't get at that bolt very easily. This is the top of the DPF. Here's the sensor we just replaced. Come all the way to the back of the DPF and follow this hard pipe. This is one of the pressure sensors. And up above, let's see if we can get a bit more light focus up there. This plug right here is on the differential pressure sensor. So we need to unplug that and then disconnect the 2 hoses, and we can remove and swap the sensor. Now, unfortunately, because of how tight it is in there, I can't get in there with my hands and a camera so you can see it at the same time, but it's pretty straightforward, and once you get a look in there, you'll understand how it all comes apart. I'd recommend, once you've taken the 10mm nut off, you take the sensor out with the hoses still attached. It's very difficult to get at these clips while it's in the truck, but the lower ones where they attach to the pipes are fairly straightforward. To orient things a little bit, this plug goes towards the front of the truck, and it's important to remember that the forward hose actually runs to the rear sensor on the DPF, and the rear hose runs to the front sensor. Swapping these two hoses onto the new sensor only takes a few seconds, and then you're ready to pop the new sensor in. Now, to reinstall this, before you pop it back on that 10mm stud, you do want to get the two hoses reinstalled, because you need to be able to flex things around, and you don't have that flexibility if the sensor is installed on the 10mm stud. Once you have those on, you can slide that back on the stud, put the clips back on the hoses, and then I can do up that 10mm nut. All right, the 10mm nut is done up. I've reconnected the wiring on the back. All I have left to do now is retighten the bolts that hold the SCR to the bracket, go into the cab and clear the codes, and then see if the engine will start. If you're not familiar with how to read and clear codes through the instrument cluster of your truck, you are able to do it using these buttons here. Now, I'm not going to go over that in this video because I have an entire separate video that I'll link in the video description, and check that out if you don't know how to do it because it is very useful. I have now cleared the codes, and we now key on, and we do still have one active code, which is creep mode, or SPN, I believe is 1254 FMI 31. That is the only active code within the engine system right now. In my mind, every time I try something and it doesn't work, my head goes back to this is a fuel problem. In fact, if you recall in the first video, that was one of the first things that I tried. As a last resort, I'm going to try swapping out to my spare fuel pump to see if this is an issue with maybe that pump isn't creating enough pressure, and therefore the high pressure fuel pump can't feed the rest of the system. Because I'm just doing this as a test, I'm not going to bother taking the old pump out of the system. I'm just going to connect a new one right there.
If you want more information on swapping the fuel pump and why you need to check the condition of yours before it fails, take a look at this video linked in the description. Swapping the pump is an easy job, and carrying a spare doesn't take up much room.
I really do have my doubts about this actually working, but it's my last ditch effort before we get into bad news territory. I am going to cycle the key a number of times to let the fuel pump run to push any air through the system back to the tank before I turn the key to try to start. Please cross your fingers for me. Here we go. Last key on. We're going to try cranking. I don't think this is going to turn out very well. Now, it did kind of sound like it was trying to fire maybe on one cylinder, so maybe I have an injector that's firing and 3 that aren't, which is probably a little more concerning. I currently have no codes left in the system for emissions. I am in creep mode, which I can clear with the computer. There's only a couple things I have left that I can check. First, I'll be checking to see if the injectors are receiving an electrical pulse. And after that, I think it's time to inspect the mechanical fuel pump. I don't have time for that today. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.